I can do things at WED without asking anybody, even my wife.
Coney Island, world's biggest barrel of
And
fun.
anywhere else your imagination takes you.
Okay, we've done that now, Paul.
To get the whole show now, you hurry, hurry, hurry.
Anything's possible in Disneyland.
Welcome aboard the Themed Attraction Podcast, where we take you for a ride through the wonderful world of theme park design, that is. You've just cast off for an exciting adventure to discover the who, what, why, and how they did it via in-depth discussions with theme park industry masters of the craft. I'm your skipper, Freddy Martin, and with me as always is theme park designer, master planner, and spatial storyteller from Storyland Studios, Mel McGowan. Where are we off to today, Mel?
Well, Fred, today we're taking a break here at Storyland Studios from actually getting to master plan an actual experimental prototype community of tomorrow with a good friend and urban planner, author, historian, and futurist, Sam Gennawey. Sam's just one of those unique guys who could truly be classified as a guru, and his experience and study of theme parks as an art form I think is going to provide some real unique insights on how there's some real-world implications for theme parks, not just inside the gates of a theme park or a fun park, but in the everyday places where we actually do life. I think of this as kind of Imagineering, but beyond the berm, kind of like what Walt Disney actually thought about doing when he first dreamed of a experimental city of tomorrow.
Yeah, not only that, Sam has written extensively on the backstory behind Universal and Disney parks, so we'll definitely get into that a bit as well. Okay, folks, keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the boat, because episode 4 is about to leave the dock. Hit it, Sam. Yeah, so welcome back, Mel. I wanted to, sort of dig into the idea that there's places, especially here in LA, we have places like the Grove or the Americana, and it's these wonderful outdoor malls and gathering places for people here in Los Angeles. But sometimes those places are a lot more like going to a Disney park than they are like a shopping mall, right?
Yeah, there's definitely been an influence, I think, of originally of Hollywood backlots onto Disneyland and the creation of theme parks, but now we're seeing that from theme parks, again, the pixie dust kind of bleeding out beyond the berm and actually impacting some of the places we do life every day, where we shop and spend time. I know where my kids do, birthdays and family meals.
Yeah, that's right. Today, you start to see those theme park sensibilities. Are those types of things, if you don't have a business that isn't creating a place for people to feel at home, enjoying themselves, or sort of taking them to another place, do you think businesses these days are sort of leaving something on the table by not bringing design into their spaces?
Well, yeah, there's definitely something called the design differential, and it's certainly a lot of what is keeping us really busy is helping both for-profit companies, corporations, as well as nonprofit clients kind of benefit from that economic return on investment that great placemaking and design and spatial storytelling can really bring them.
Yeah, I mean, you just think about places like just the Starbucks motif, that they want to give you that sense of coming to a place that's better than the normal coffee shop down the street. It's a destination.
Yeah, it can, definitely be applied at any scale from we're doing a barbers and beers place, an individual retail tenant, all the way up to something at the scale of an entire town, which is what we're working on today.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell me about this project, because we're going to go into it a little bit with Sam when we get the interview going, but tell me a little bit about that so we have some context.
Oh, sure. Yeah, a good friend of ours, Christian Moran, who, again, is hopefully going to be a future guest, is part of a nonprofit foundation called Grant Town, who is really about changing the world, basically. And, their stated purpose is literally to help build a world where every man, woman, and child on earth is fed, clothed, housed, and educated by the end of the 21st century. No small goal, but again, we've been hired to actually develop kind of a post millennium 21st century version of some of a parallel to Walt Disney's thinking behind that Epcot idea of an experimental prototype community of tomorrow, not as a kind of a theme park, but literally as a functioning experimental neighborhood that would also serve as a world-class visitor destination for people from around the world to kind of get to check out, not just read or not just watch YouTube videos, but actually check out the latest innovations in transportation, education, medicine, energy, and environmental management. So we're thrilled to be able to play in a pretty unique sandbox and to actually get to do that with great people like Sam Gennawey.
Yeah, my jaw is on the floor. I mean, the great dream of seeing something like Epcot really come true is happening like within these walls, which is pretty exciting. So that's why we asked Sam Gennawey to come out and join us in conversation about the growth of experiential design, spatial storytelling outside the gates of the theme parks as well as inside. So let's get right into it. Here it is, our interview with author and urban planner Sam Gennawey.
So great to break out, Sam, and be with you. We're breaking away from a quick work session on a kind of a fun little project. I think I couldn't imagine a better guy on the planet to be part of this in some way, shape, or form. I think I first read your book, Sam, on Walt's take on the city of tomorrow, and today we're actually getting to play in that sandbox a little bit.
I think it's absolutely marvelous. It's one of the great things about Walt Disney is that when he came up with ideas, they tended to be rather timeless, rather classic. And it was kind of unfortunate to see that his version of Epcot got shelved, but it's exciting to see that it may come back alive and it may be even more relevant and more important now than ever. So yeah, this is a real exciting project.
Well, I was just curious what parallels you saw between Walt's take on Epcot as a city and our G-Tech project as we're working on it, and just getting that first impression.
Well, one of the things that was really great about Epcot, and one of the reasons why I think it was sort of tragic that it never got built, was that it was really based on something that we don't really have much these days, or we're really quite lacking, which is optimism. Walt Disney was an optimal behaviorist. That's what Ray Bradbury called him, which was he wasn't just a believer that there's going to be a better future, but that if you do everything that you do with the full heart and love, and you get it done at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the year, you can reflect upon what you've done, and it's amazing what you've accomplished. That's optimal behaviorism. And he wanted to create a community that induced optimal behaviorism in all of the participants that lived in the community. And that's what Epcot was really about. And it was an optimistic statement that technology, when used correctly and tested by people, can make everyone's lives better, and this project does that sort of thing, and it points a path forward. And I'm sure that once people have visited, you're going to go back and you're going to be really inspired, and you're going to ask the question, well, why can't we do some of this in my community? I saw this over there. This doesn't seem too odd. We could do that over here in our community. And that's exactly what Walt's Epcot was supposed to be, is that you would go to it thinking you're going on a vacation experience, but you would come home inspired and become a project champion for better change within your community, using some of the things that you saw demonstrated on your vacation. So, it's fun. It's been what, decades, and there's been since then some proposals for utopian communities, but they weren't based on this classical use of empirical data that the G-Tech project is. So yeah, it's cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's so fun being with Sam, just because we are both odd ducks, that are both, I think, at some level resonate with Walt Disney's kind of take on this optimistic choice of looking at tomorrow, but also fusing that somehow with the power of story, with classic spaces. I know Walt was inspired by some of his World War I sojourn through Europe, and seeing these kind of medieval villages and and what have you. But again, to also have that share that urban planning background with you, and in I think a lot of our recent work, for me as a spatial storyteller working on theme parks and some of the even sacred space work that we do, not to necessarily get to go as deep into the actual urban planning, and with this project to actually look at an experimental community that would be kind of a cellular scale, that could actually grow into a town and then ultimately a city, has been really fascinating.
Well, one of the things I get concerned about when people ask me to look at these type of large scale plans and stuff like that is that sometimes the designers are trying to be smarter than the people that they serve. And when that ends up happening is that they create these very lifeless, dull spaces that don't seem to resonate with folks. A good example of this would be Grand Avenue in downtown Los Angeles. You've got some incredible world-class architecture. You've got the Walt Disney Concert Hall. You've got the Broad Museum. You've got the Museum of Contemporary Art, all based on this absolutely wonderful boulevard with the services that are below. But even with all of this activity, with all these cultural activities in one space, the place doesn't feel like anything other than a super clean street. It doesn't make you want to spend time or have a conversation.
Not exactly a Champs-Élysées.
No. Or, it's not like, we forget that one of the greatest public spaces in the world is Plaza San Marco in Venice. And we forget the fact that it took 800 years to get it the way that it is today. The buildings took 800 years to get built around the plaza, but the core activity, which was the transit node, it was the pathway that everybody had to pass through on their way to someplace else. It's that activity is what created the success of the facility. So what's neat about this project is that it's based really on where Walt Disney came from, an untrained architect, which was a guy who traveled everywhere in the world because he owned a movie studio, so he could do that. He had an incredible memory. His daughter, Diane, told me when we had lunch once that she noticed after World War II, her dad would walk a street and count steps and then write it in a little book. And she started noticing what he was doing is he was measuring the width of streets that he really liked. And if you look at it, the width of the street at the Burbank studio is too small for cars, really. It's meant for bicycles and for pedestrians. He wanted to create the essence of a street without actually creating a street. And he didn't want it to look like a sidewalk because people tend to walk in the street, not on sidewalks. So it's based on this empirical data, and the GTech project is based on components that if you were to break them apart, everything already exists someplace. It's nothing that you're creating that's really, really weird or new. You're just packaging them in such a way where they function really well.
1 + 1 = 3 when it's the right assemblage.
I never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's true. That's true. It's
every decision, every detail marching towards that same.
It's the Christopher Alexander concept of a higher degree of life. That everything has a degree of life, and it's how you put the degrees of. It's how you add these and how you put the components together that gives you a higher degree of life. And when you achieve the highest degree of life, you have that quality without a name, which is that you're standing within a space. You don't know why. You can't describe it, but the hair in the back of your neck is standing up. You feel like this is exactly where you should be. It's the feeling that I think that any Disneyland park fan gets the moment that you walk into the town square initially and then the hub, or you sit on the Wizard of Braz porch, or if you're a Walt Disney World fan, it's that higher degree of life is when you sit on the two chairs, the rocking chairs behind the Hall of Presidents, and you're slightly away from all the traffic within Liberty Square, but you're still involved within it. That's the higher degree of life. There's in most good theme parks, there's at least a couple of spaces, ideally, that you have that. In most great churches, there's a space that you transport yourself from the real world to the sacred space, and it makes you pause and humble and recognize that you are in that higher degree of life space. If a sacred space doesn't exist like that, you've kind of failed as a designer, right?
Right.
Yeah. So those are the things, and I can see multiple opportunities in the stuff that you showed me for that.
Well, I'm fascinated by the idea of the third place and how in Los Angeles, you mentioned, Los Angeles is a tough place to live. Yeah. And feel like you have a place within it. It's functional. It's hugely functional, but it's just difficult to find life in there. And so Starbucks become the holy places where people want to gather and be between work and home. And I'd love to hear you guys talk about it. Like you mentioned Venice. These are places in the world that people gather to because of that back of the hair on the back of the neck.
Yeah. Well, there's a bargain that has to be made, and the bargain is that the higher the density, that is, that the more people living within an area, and the smaller the living accommodations. The bargain is that you then have to give them extended cultural amenities. In other words, the ability to not necessarily have to be within your house, but to participate within community. So, and in Los Angeles, the way that Los Angeles was organized originally is to be everything that the East Coast wasn't. So we went into this lower density. Everybody had a backyard. Everybody had a front yard. We had private space. So we didn't need to have a lot of parks. We were surrounded by public space. We were surrounded by mountains. We were surrounded by beaches. So we had all the open space that we wanted, and then we had our own personal open space. So we didn't have much in the way of open space within the urban core. But that's changed as Los Angeles becomes a denser and denser city, and we get more and more dwelling units and more compact areas. We have a greater need for these social spaces, and we don't really have those. And Charles Moore, the architect and philosopher, wrote that in Los Angeles, we pay for the public life. And that is that we pay a membership fee to go to Disneyland or to Huntington Library or to whatever private club that we belong to, so that's our public space.
He kind of recognized that Walt Disney kind of was scratching that itch that we all have
and Walt knew,
as a herd species to collect.
That's right. And that was Walt's idea, really. And if you look at a lot of the earliest discussions of Disneyland, it was to create a town center that didn't exist in a city that didn't have a town center. He wanted to create that kind of public space. Is why he kept the entrance price really, really low. But he still had an entrance price so that it would kind of keep out the riffraff. You had to make a commitment to at least spend $1 or whatever it was at the time, and that was enough of a commitment to weed out.
Same reason Walter Knott ended up needing to put up a gate.
Exactly. But in both cases, they always kept the general admission very low. If it wasn't for that, I would have never gotten to where I am today. It's because Walt Disney had a very low general admission price that my mom, and a lower blue class family that I grew up in, my mom could afford to drive us to Disneyland. She could afford to pay for us to go into Disneyland, to let my two older brothers go run around, but we could never afford the food, and we could never afford to go on any of the rides. So I kept going on the same 4 rides all the time. And she was kind enough to do this fairly often. We went about once a month as just sort of a release for my brothers, mostly to run around, and I was much younger, so I hung out with her. And so that's why I saw Carousel of Progress so often, and Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and Circle Vision, because those were the...
Got embedded in your DNA.
Yeah. So that's why I became what I am today. Whatever that is. So so that this becomes more and more important, and this plan does that. This plan assumes that people are going to live in smaller private spaces, but they're going to have incredible social amenities that's going to make up for it.
Well, we can't wait to share more with you in the future. Maybe on a future podcast, we'll have our mutual friend Christian Moran, one of our clients and collaborators, who actually did that, great documentary on Walt's take on tomorrow and futurism. But man, Sam, I've been a fan of yours for a pretty long time, as you well know from our first little tiki bar hangout at Trader Sam's. And I think there's probably some of our listeners that may not understand the epicness that stands before me. That is Sam Gennawey. Again, to have a true guru, it's not something you get to run into every day.
This is why Mel has so many friends, by the way.
I know. God, I'm
but seriously, to be as prolific of an author, a historian, but actually to have a legitimate career as a paid consultant, an urban planner, and then man, the amazing journey that you're on right now. Gosh, do you mind just giving us a quick the Sam Gennawey story?
Sure,
I know you were working on another biography, but let's forget that. Let's hear your biography.
Oh, sure. God, I'm blushing. That's very nice. Thank you very much for the comments. I'm Sam Gennawey, and I'm an urban planner by training. I spent actually about 25 years in the music industry. Before that, I ran a record company. I ran a radio station.
And I was in a
Chicago.
death rock band.
Yeah. I used to tour with Def Leppard and Bon Jovi and people like that for a little while. So I had that life.
And you were the enemy because back in my day, everybody only cared about glam bands, and and so it was few and far between the zombie zoo clubs of the world that would allow our band in.
I was one of the alternative music guys over at Mercury Records. So I was the guy.
I knew I liked you for a reason.
I was the guy who was doing stage dives, what I called old man stage dives for the Mighty Boss Tones, the ska band. And that what I mean by the old man is I didn't have to fight my way up on the stage. I just used my backstage pass, come around the front, and then jump out into the audience. Awesome. It's very, very, very fun. I was an urban planner, and I've done a lot of urban planning consulting, mostly public communications, translating, trying to inspire people through this process of collaborative planning. And collaborative planning assumes that those who live, work, and play within a community are the real experts of that community. So as design professionals, you can see how this all links and everything else. As design professionals, I always thought it was my job is to first be very curious, get inside people's heads, pull it from their lips. That's really one of my specialties, doing over 1,000 community workshops and charrettes on over 180 projects. Then through that curiosity, a sense of clarity. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. We all share the same mission, because when people have clarity of mission, they will do whatever it takes to accomplish that. Then creativity. It's remarkable. A lot of times people have brilliant ideas. They just don't know how to articulate them very well. So if you work with them, you can get some really brilliant ideas. And plus our experience, we can share ideas. And then finally, confidence, because as a consultant, I was always going to be leaving a project before it was ultimately done. So I needed to identify members of the community that would be so inspired that they would be the ones to get the thing accomplished, because I hated just doing plans for the sake of plans. So I was doing urban planning when the economy kind of slowed down, especially the idea of visioning was becoming very difficult. I thought, well, it's time to write a book. So I was going to write a book about Christopher Alexander, who's a great architect and philosopher of pattern language. Everybody should check him out. And it was about empirical data, because ultimately he's a guy who just watched and saw how civilization worked and then figured out a way of combining the best of the best. And
Walt, he was a good synthesizer.
Exactly. And then I thought, well, Christopher Alexander's pretty esoteric, but Walt Disney isn't. And Walt Disney is the same way. He wasn't trained. He had this amazing memory, and he would remember the best. And then when he decided to start doing a theme park, start doing an amusement park, that was his inspiration. Was I was going to bring basically the best of my vacations and work travel.
He bought like Greenfield Village as Main Street, Knott's Berry Farm as Frontierland,
exactly.
Tivoli Gardens as Fantasyland,
exactly. And you get it.
1939 World's Fair is World of Tomorrow.
Exactly, you get it. And then a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people think that this was all brand new and stuff, and it wasn't. It was really the best of things that already existed, just brought together in such a way where it seemed new and different. But it's one of the reasons why Disneyland resonated so immediately, is because everybody experienced oddly something like that somewhere else. So when they got there, it wasn't so strange that it was uncomfortable. It was strange that it became endearing. Mm-hmm. So I wrote Walt Disney and the Promise of Progress City, and that's been the gift that keeps on giving. And it got me some work for WDI. So thank you all very much over there. So I got to work for them a little bit on a consulting project. And then it sold well enough that the Unofficial Guide guys, Len Testa and Bob Sellinger, asked me to do a Disneyland history book. So I did the Disneyland story, The Unofficial Guide, which is the most annotated Disney book, I believe, that is out there, with like 750 citations.
So well researched.
Yeah, it was because we were getting to a point that even the Walt Disney Company was making up history that didn't actually exist. And so I really wanted to try to, in one place, get the facts down. Then
And
that's
the approach of treating it as a biography of Disneyland as a living.
Thank you. And
that was so original. and
that
so
came
great.
from that was inspired by that lunch with Diane. Diane Disney Miller. I was doing a talk about the Mineral King Ski Resort at the Walt Disney Family Museum. Diane, her husband Tom.
Ronnie?
Oh, pardon me?
Ronnie?
Yeah, Ron Miller. The most humble man in the world who shouldn't be because he did so many great things. Yeah. And he's just too damn humble for his own good. And we were supposed to go to
Not exactly
and Jeff
a typical
Curdy,
Hollywood mogul personality.
yeah, and it was Jeff Curdy and David Price, and we were supposed to go to a restaurant before the talk, and the restaurant lost her reservation. So we had to go back to the museum, which was great because they go, well, do you like chili? And I'm going, yeah, I love chili. So we sat around the conference table and we talked, and I started talking to her about this idea that I had. And I said, it seems to me that your dad sort of thought of Disneyland from everything that I've seen, kind of like it was your younger brother. And she's going, yeah, that was it. That was it. Because it's like he treated it just like he treated us. If it wasn't quite right, he would figure out a way of adjusting it. And that's what I thought. Well, there's been more than enough Disneyland books, so nobody needed another one. But as I treated it like a biography, what I turned out to be amazed was, is if you really think about it, Walt died when the kid was only 11. It should have died with him because it was a very personal project. Really, there's very, very few very personal projects that have succeeded beyond the life of the guy who started it. But not only succeeded, but it thrived. And that made me realize that Walt taught his child good values. And when they stick to the good values, the park tends to succeed. And then when they did like DCA 1.0 and they decided to be rebellious against Dad and his values, it didn't succeed. So it started making me understand that there was
That
a
was the
DNA.
death rock phase.
Yeah. It started making me realize that there was a DNA about Disneyland that Walt thought. And so that's how that book came about. Then they asked me to do a book about Walt Disney World, but I always thought that Walt Disney World was more of an academic project and I wasn't really interested in it. And I recognized that nobody had really written about Universal Studios. So I wrote about Universal Studios because it also is it was a city and it had a lot of the urban planning stuff that I liked about it. And that was fascinating because I got to talk to, unlike Disneyland, most of the original creators were still alive.
Right.
So I got to meet all the different people, Phil Hedema and who did a lot of the work, and Bob Ward and Barry Upson, who is just really, for those that are out there, Barry Upson. Start to look at Barry Upson is one of the great names of theme parks. Barry Upson, he's the master planner for all the Universal parks, that kind of stuff. And so I got to meet all those guys. So I finished that book, was happy with it, worked out well. They called it Universal versus Disney, which was not what the book is about. And then I got a call from a guy named Jay Stein, who was throughout the Universal book, but I tried for a year to get a hold of Jay, and Jay would not return my call. Then said, I don't want to participate. I'm done. I don't have anything to do with it anymore. But
Busy on the beach, right?
He's busy on the beach, yeah. He's the only theme park guy that I've ever met that when he retired, he really retired. He just went off, never got back, threw away most of his stuff, kept only a few things like his little original E.T. head that Steven Spielberg gave him that was part of the ride mock-up. And then he contacted me. Terry Winnick, who's the guy who designed a lot of the great early stuff at Universal Studios, had passed away. Really, really neat guy. A lot of great stories from Terry. And Terry had passed away, and Terry's wife gave Jay a copy of my book. And so Jay wrote me and says, hey, it's a great book. I like it. Good. You did really good research. There's only one thing missing. Yeah, what is it, Jay? It's me. Yeah, well, I tried. He's going, well, come up to my house. Let's talk. And so I started doing a series of interviews with Jay and recording interviews with Jay. And it was supposed to be, in a way, an update to the Universal versus Disney book. But the stories were just so good that I ended up writing J-Bangs, which in a sense is the DNA of the real DNA. But it was also a book not about theme parks, but it was about an organizational culture that does not exist. This was MCA, Music Corporation of America. This was a very small group of Jewish movie moguls who would completely tear each other apart in personally, internally, and then unless an enemy came, and then they would group together and they would not only beat the enemy, they would destroy the enemy, they would burn the enemy, they would bury it, they would dance on the grave, they would dig it up again, then they would burn it again, and then bury it, and then dance on it. I mean, this is the company when Jaws became the biggest movie ever. Everybody made fun of Sid Sheinberg, going, "Wow, we thought it was going to do better." And they were being sincere about that. But you know, when Michael Eisner decided to build Disney MGM Studio based on all the designs that Universal, and I've documented they were based on the designs of Universal, that's when Lou Wasserman, who was pretty non-committal to building in Florida, turned to Jay Stein and said, "Here's $600 million. Bury them."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then that's how, if it wasn't for Michael Eisner making the stupid mistake of taking MCA on, Universal Studios wouldn't have gotten in the theme park business in the big way that they did. And now now they have more momentum than the Disney park. So I've been through 4 books. I also wrote a little bit for the American Planning Association about theme shopping malls in Los Angeles. And I wrote for the American Institute of Architects in Florida about themed architecture for Central Florida, and then did some other writing for people I can't talk about.
Well, I gotta ask you a question. You know, John Jurdy, who not so recently passed away, but you know, had done master plans for everything from Euro Disney to City, you know, Universal City Walk. And what's your impression of his kind of influence, the whole you know, lifestyle, retail, entertainment complex? And obviously he was an architect that went to school with Frank Gehry, and instead of getting the high commissions with the art museums of the world, got stuck with the humble typology of shopping centers and places that people actually still gather, and isn't, I think, somewhat underrated, you know, and as a designer. But you know, he was definitely another fan of Walt Disney's as well. He
kind of got stuck in the sort of same box as Victor Gruen did, which is that they were much more brilliant than now people give them credit for, because the shopping mall has never been looked upon architecturally as something that's important, but that's only because a lot of architects are snobs. And that's why a lot of architects don't like Disney and the theme parks as well. They think that the theme parks are sort of beneath them. But I always argue, have you ever designed anything that resonates with people for as long as Main Street USA? Don't think so. So until you can show me that you've done work that's superior to that, I think I'm going to give some credit to Harper Goff and the guys who did all that kind of stuff. With that said, I think Jurdy is brilliant, and it's been interesting. I did work for one theme park company for a short time, and because of my background, I got sent out. I did a speech in London, and then that got me a gig to be the host for MAPIC. MAPIC is the largest shopping mall conference in the world. It attracts like 7,000 people to Cannes, France. And I don't know exactly how I got this gig, but I was the host for the leisure division presentation. So if you go in and there's a trampoline park or a movie theater, virtual reality rides, that's the leisure division. And I spent 2 days and something like 40 different presentations introducing people giving these pitches. And within the shopping mall industry, traditionally, food and beverage and entertainment may be added up to 5 to 7% of the mix, and in some malls, maybe as much as 10%. And within the next 10 years, food, beverage, and entertainment is going to add up to more than 40%. The shopping mall is not going to be a shopping mall. It's going to become an experience mall where you go eat, where you go experience products like Tesla cars, or like what Lincoln Mercury has done, or what Amazon has done, where you're not necessarily purchasing a product, but you have a chance to experience a product. If you really think about an Apple store, Apple doesn't care whether you buy something from the store. They want you to buy something from Apple. If you go to the store just to play with it a little bit, and then you go online to buy it, it works for them. That's what the stores are all about. So you're going to go
test drive center.
You're going to test drive experience products. You're going to experience food, and you're going to experience life. And you're going to experience life both in a physical, recreational way, because there's a demand for that, and you're going to experience life in a cultural way, because cultural tourism far surpasses almost anything else that we're doing in tourism these days. So Jurdy has it right, and his model still works. His model of not putting the weenies directly at the ends, but making people people have to move through a space to explore the space.
I've always called it the Journey Curve.
Yeah. The quality, variety, surprise that pulls you through that space. I still think that functionally still works really, really well.
Yeah. Well, it's always, obviously a subject that's close to my heart. I did my graduate thesis on the idea of Disney urbanism and postmodern kind of influences beyond the berm of the Disney parks, and Jordy's one of those guys that definitely took the show on the road. But any thoughts in terms of the influences of that holistic placemaking and spatial storytelling on, again, real world environments, whether it's in hospitals, our cities, the way that we have a higher maybe expectation of placemaking.
Yeah, we all get to blame Walt Disney for that. Yeah, it is. That's what's really the reason I wrote the first book, is I wanted to understand that theme parks were having such an influence on stuff outside the berm. I wanted to understand the DNA of a theme park versus the real world. So that's where I came up with my theory of the messy vitality versus the lack of visual contradictions. In the real world, we have messy vitality. Not everything lines up. The signs don't all line up. The buildings don't necessarily all line up. That's actually a good thing. It keeps us alive, awake. We're aware of our surroundings. It can be very intriguing. That's messy vitality. If you have too much messy vitality, you can feel threatened, uncomfortable, and then you start to close down. If you have too little messy vitality, you get the Grand Avenues thing. It's pretty, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, but it just is sort of lacking. And if you look at a lot of public spaces today, there's a lot of this going after the theme park. Let's say Los Angeles Live, LA Live, is to me one of the worst public spaces ever designed, because it's designed to have the messy vitality is so overwhelming that it becomes uncomfortable, and there's no person. It doesn't make you feel like a person. It doesn't care about you as a human. It only cares about your eyeballs and what you can consume. So that's the messy vitality in the real world. And as John Hench, I learned from John Hench that on the theme parks, you eliminate all the messy vitality and you eliminate all the visual contradictions. And you do that so that your lizard brain starts to relax, to shut down, and you start to communicate with people on a different level. It's why people talk to strangers in a theme park line, whereas you'd never talk to a stranger anywhere else. It's why people will walk more than 650 feet without complaining, whereas anywhere else they'd start bitching about that sort of thing. So, and it's why people wear really goofy hats, literally in this case, goofy hats, and then the moment they get outside the berm, they take the hat off and put it in the trunk, and they never wear it again. It's
the only place that I wear my cheesy Disney tiki shirts.
Exactly. Yeah. It's they have the spaces have two different sets of DNA. They function differently from each other, and when you're true to one, you're true to the other. You do well, but if you try to cross blend them, they tend to fail. That's why a lot of theme parks are really boring these days. A lot of the public spaces you just sort of pass through. So that's my take on how I look at the world.
This episode was brought to you by MyStudioSpace.com. My Studio Space is a group of fun and thoughtful online professionals who want to make you happy by simplifying and personalizing your website with powerful and cheap web hosting and domains. If you're not web savvy, talk to My Studio Space. They rub off. Honest. Call 407-701-7577 or go to MyStudioSpace.com to get started.
Well, so I know this stuff is taking you on a bit of a global journey. Not too recently, Japan. Can you share a little bit about that trip, kind of the why and the insights there? I was just curious. One of my buddies, Greg Dameron, we were mentioning, is another Universal Master Planner, and I was on a boat with him and asked him what his favorite theme park was in the world, or what he considered the best. Of course, beyond the original Disneyland, and he, without a hesitation, said Universal Studios Japan.
Yeah, I'm having a struggle with that. I've been asked that a lot, and I would say Disneyland, but I can't say it's the Disneyland of today. It's the Disneyland in my imagination, what I wrote about. So unfortunately, it's just, that's because Walt walked there. But yeah, I'm really hard struck now between Disney Sea, which I just still, as a physical environment, absolutely love. But and I guess I'll put that in context of what the story is. this whole theme park thing for me has always been a hobby, really. So thank you for buying the books, because you're helping to pay for the hobby. It's always been a hobby for me, but I've been fortunate to be able to have some professional experiences with it. I got to do 2 talks at the Walt Disney Family Museum. I've taught a number of college classes. I've been a lecturer at a bunch of college classes for it. Done a lot of talks with the books, and I've also had a little bit of work with WDI, which was fun. And recently, Universal Studios Japan has an absolutely wonderful, brilliant design team that gets to do. I mean, if you ever want to be a theme park designer, you want to go work for Universal Studios Japan, because not only do you get to work on concepts, but there's the demand to get the concepts built. So these are really young designers who are getting to see their work realized in real time before them, which is, you know how that doesn't happen very often. So it's a really dynamic studio that they have over there. And they asked if I could come out, and they recognize that Japan has a little relationship to Florida and very little relationship to the original Universal Studios and the whole idea of the Universal Studios and what it was about. So they asked me, because I wrote the history book of it, if I could come and just talk about the history and the DNA of the Universal Studios, so that they had a little bit better understanding, a little bit better context as to why that backlot's the way that it is and that sort of stuff. And they just ate it up. They were great. They were just a wonderful audience. And they and really, really fun to work with. And they took me on tours of their park, and they sent me off to to Tokyo Disneyland so I could see it and then come back and make a comparison to them. And what I ended up picking up from it was that, and I'll go through all the different parks. So Tokyo Disneyland, the reason to go there is if you're old fart like me, and you want old school Disneyland in the sense of everything is hyper clean. Everybody's really friendly. If there is a line, they do whatever it takes to make that line go even faster. They'll pull more vehicles on. They'll build vehicles in front of you just to get you going. Everything is, there's the amount of outdoor carts is limited to a few, as opposed to everywhere you go, there's an out of place outdoor cart.
It's almost they've turned the Dick Nunis, Jim Cora, Walt Disney standard operating procedure into a Bible. Like,
that's right.
It's like
that's
the
right.
law.
You know what? That's it. That's right. Your audience would get it. That's it. It's visiting the Disneyland of my childhood, and not so many years ago. And for that reason alone,
It's written in stone.
It's written in stone.
Don't mess with it.
That's it. That's it. And for that reason alone, it's worth going to visit it. If you've ever been frustrated with the crowds at Disneyland right now, or what's going on with Walt Disney World, go to Tokyo Disneyland. It will restore your faith in the Disney parts.
And the Tomorrowland actually still looks like the 1970s.
Well, but they're tearing actually much of that. That's almost all gone now.
Well.
But it's and as the layout of the park, it's the kind of the funky Magic Kingdom layout. So in that part, I don't give it high points. Tokyo Disney Sea is just, it's the greatest physical environment one can go into, isn't it? I mean, it really is. It is just. But I learned on this trip that underneath this patina of absolutely stunning urban environment is a really ordinary Disney park. The rides are very just Disney rides. The thrills are the Disney, thrill. They don't see me just doing like a gentle rocking here, but you can't see that. Yeah, it's buried buried underneath this facade is a very gentle Disney park. Now, that's not to complain. That's not to complain at all. In fact, I think that the world needs that. Sinbad's Voyage, I have to confess, did 4 times in a row. I love that. It's because it's a family-friendly dark ride with an Alan Menken song that just is an earworm, and the little characters all move, and there's like hundreds of them.
It's a small world.
It's a small world-like ride. I went on it 4 times in a row because I just think it's brilliant. I don't think that there's many people who have the skill to design a family-friendly ride like that anymore. It's just brilliant. So that Tokyo Disney Sea is way up there, but underneath, and then Universal Studios Japan, it's the true modern theme park. It is, all theme parks in the future are going to be more like Universal Studios Japan than they are going to be Tokyo Disneyland, Tokyo Disney Sea. They're going to be that, they get it, they've hit the mix. Universal Studios Japan is the perfect blend between family friendliness, where they had the Peanuts, the Dr. Seuss, the Sesame Street characters, and Hello Kitty all in one area. So they hit the family-friendly note that is missing at the other Universal parks, but then they've got thrill rides, and like brilliant thrill rides like Jaws. I rode Jaws like at least a half a dozen or more times, again and again and again, because it's still there, you know. And the thrill rides are real. They're Harry Potter Forbidden Journey, the roller coaster that they have in Jurassic Park, which I forget the name, but it's that flying coaster. It's the best, you know. And they have the Adventures of Spider-Man, so they hit the balance of real thrill to family friendliness, and they hit the right note all the way. And the way that I was describing the park to them is I was describing it as that what's unusual about Universal Studios Japan is it is a blend of both. The park itself, overall layout, and as you walk through the park, is a very messy vitality. It's got a lot of contradictions, but that's right for Universal because Universal is a back lot. And if you've been on a back lot, every turn is a contradiction because every turn, it only matters the direction you're facing to get the shot. The moment you turn, it has to be a different shot. So Universal has the permission to have that messiness in the park. But the moment that you decide to enter an intellectual property realm, like going off to Harry Potter or going off to the Kidlands, you go off on a spur and you're completely enveloped in that particular intellectual property. You are completely immersed in that particular environment. So you've got all the visual contradictions are gone. So your lizard brain is back down again, and you're riding a flying Snoopy ride and going, yeah! You know, this is great, and not being embarrassed at all about it, like I just did. So, so I have to say, if I were to go back to Japan again, I would go to Universal Studios Japan first for a few days, and then do a day trip to the 2 Disney parks, just like I did.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. Well.
Wow. Yeah.
I know you're on your own epic e-ticket adventure. You know, in the I don't know what you're calling that vehicle out there, but you've got to have a pet name for it at this point,
That's
right?
Darlene.
Darlene.
That's Darlene. Darlene is my 2012 Airstream Interstate 23-foot camper van. She's jet black. She just got washed recently. Because I
looking good. I
upgraded my batteries for her.
We can see her out the window, listeners.
I can see
We're
this.
admiring the glistening
I can
glow.
see the solar panel is getting some sun, so I'm
Nice.
recharging my battery, which is a beautiful thing. So if I decide to go dry camping tonight, I decided, you know, I've done all this work on theme parks. And I could remain an urban planner, but it's, you know, I'm like Walt Disney. It's like you get bored with something after a while, and it's time to go do something else. So the something else was I'm retracing a tour that happened in 1920. In 1920, a group of automobile enthusiasts, egged on by Stephen Mather, who's the guy who is the newly in charge guy of the U.S. National Park Service, which was created in 1916. Stephen Mather recognized that for the national parks to get the funding necessary to be preserved and protected from here on out, he needed to get rich people involved so that they could urge their congressional leaders to fund the National Park Service. And at the time, rich people were the only people that owned automobiles. So they came up with this idea of creating an automobile tour in 1916 that actually happened in 1920, where a group drove around 4,600 miles to 13 national parks to try to demonstrate that we need better roads to connect to the national parks, and we need better roads within the national parks. So they created the Park to Park Highway, which went around to all the national parks on the west. They did they did this in 1920. They used to sell maps of this tour till about 1928. It was sponsored by the Yellowstone Highway Association, the Park to Park Highway Association, the Southern California Automobile Club. All these different organizations came together. So what I'm doing is retracing the steps of the original 1920 path to talk about what's changed over 100 years. What national parks have happened, what state parks have happened, what's happened to a lot of the towns that were on the map. Because I'm discovering about 10% of the 400 towns that I'm visiting so far don't exist anymore. And a lot of this is on little blue highways, the little side roads. So Darlene and
You're living the Cars movie.
I'm living. I guess I am.
You're like Lightning McQueen in your RV, though.
I'm on the road. That's right. I got the big red
You're driving
camera
Mac.
playing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm driving Mac. So it just made a lot of sense. Instead of staying in a lot of hotels, I'm traveling slowly. So it's Sam Van RV Adventures. We have a YouTube channel. I have a website, samvanrvadventures.com. I'm going to be doing the Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And it's slowly driving to the United States. And when you're ever on a road trip and you always see those little brown and white signs that say this thing's over there, I'm actually going over there and I'm documenting that and I'm telling you about it. And to date, it has been wonderful. I have discovered all sorts of great things. I have discovered the Rosie the Riveter National Monument, where it is a celebration of those who stayed at home on the home front to help us win World War II in Richmond, California. The Port Chicago Memorial, where a bunch of African-American crews got blown up when bombs were accidentally fell in the loading dock because their white officers were betting on which crew could load the ships faster. I've been to 3 different internment camps that the Japanese were put in during World War II. On a more happier note, I went to the Sacagawea Center, where they had a tribute to Seaman, the dog that was Meriwether Lewis's pet dog that walked the entire expedition of Lewis and Clark. And they have the world's greatest dog park behind it to celebrate dogs on travel. The Museum of America out in the middle of Nevada, I think it is, that has the weirdest collection of stuff you'd ever seen on 4 acres. So I'm doing this drive. It has no end date. I gave up my house and my apartment, and I'm living full time in this thing. So it's been a blast. Been doing it for about 8 weeks now.
Wow, and getting work done.
I've written. I'll have a book coming. I'll have a book coming out. The book is going to be called "Wind, Water, Time, and Pressure." Which is that's the title of the book, because those are the 4 fundamental qualities that change everything. If you are out in the boonies long enough, you recognize that wind, water, time, and pressure can change absolutely everything. And whether you're doing it on a physical level or you're thinking about it on a mental level, it's a great way of understanding the world that we're living in.
Well, I'm pretty sure that everyone listening has kind of gotten that I wasn't kidding when I said guru. When you've got people saying like flow like the water, you know, grasshopper.
How many times have you been driving across the country and you see this sign and it announces some amazing thing and you just don't have time to go and do it? This is a dream to be able to see some of these places that really are. They're both history and they're a place that's going to describe to you something far bigger than the life you're living.
It is. And it is, and after a while, as you're driving along, you start to see patterns of communities. Different communities look a little bit differently. And I'm also having fun, just the whole idea of the whole van life, the whole RV life, living this whole minimalist life, living in a much smaller space, having, my backyard 3 days before I forget, this is a blur now. I was at the top of Joshua Tree the other day. Now I'm here in Lake Elsinore.
Beautiful Lake Elsinore.
But I spent one night on Pacific Coast Highway just because I was bored with driving, and I just pulled on the side of the road. There was a bunch of other campers, so I knew I could park the night over there and button myself up and spend the night on the street listening to cars whizzing by. But late at night, there are very few cars, and I've got the ocean view that was right out there. So it's great, and it's allowing me to touch base with community. I'm certainly talking to a lot of people I would have never ever talked to that are out there. I'm meeting a lot of people not from the United States that are out there during the summer. So I'm getting to touch base with America a lot, and I'll have a lot of stories about the different cultures of RV life as well too. So if any of you are fifth wheelers that are out there and you know what I'm talking about, you're all crazy. I just want to let you know, you're the madmen of RVers. And I'm going to say the madmen because I've never seen very many fifth-wheeler women. Now, women, you're all putting campers on the back of your pickup trucks. That's what I've seen, but I won't get into much more of that. That'll be for a future
It's definitely
podcast.
a culture.
So there's these little
Amazing
cultures. There's the van life people like me. We're the extra strange people, like I think out there. We're the new hippies.
It's extreme. So how can people find out about that and follow you on your RV adventure?
Please do. I have a YouTube channel up now. It's the Sam Van RV Adventures YouTube channel. There's www.samvanrvadventures.com website. So go there and subscribe. I'll have a Patreon page that's supposed to be going up here fairly soon, so that you can subscribe, and I'll be sending you updates as to where I'm at, and you'll even have a chance for very little money. You'll have a chance to not only help me do this by subscribing to the premier VIP quality area, but you'll get your name in the book as an acknowledgement, and you'll get an autographed copy of the book when it comes out too.
That's super.
So that'll all be on the Patreon page when that comes up. So
Well, what an interesting contrast to be. We talked about, kind of the urban to rural or urban to natural transect, in urban planning, and to be essentially living this life of being out there in the most beautiful pieces of nature and creation on the planet, but then to actually get to collaborate in a sandbox, thinking of this urban future that in a way is almost like a return to kind of a Garden of Eden kind of state. I know for me, it's been a little bit of a dream getting to collaborate with you on this, and to do a special project like this. That I think I drew my first future city when I was 12 or 13 years old. And
I was building little dirt cities in the backyard. My mom reminded me of.
I think I went right from Legos to drawing these. For information on our GTech project, granttown.org. Is kind of an in-progress website. Again, can't wait to share more in the future. But again,
Brilliant
what a
stuff.
pleasure and a privilege it is
Thank you.
to collaborate in this amazing sandbox with you, Sam. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
sharing your story with us today.
That was a great interview. Sam is a really smart guy. I mean, he knows a whole lot about both the history and really where the world's going as far as urban planning.
You think?
Yeah. Yeah, and we got a chance to go out and get into his Airstream and check it out. Darlene, she's a beautiful van, but he's really embarking on an adventure.
I think he's got like a little mini portable Epcot on wheels, basically. Literally, it's just really a pretty state-of-the-art, technology. And one of the fascinating things to me, though, about this epic journey that he's on right now is, again, that idea of uncovering the story, behind some amazing places. Even as you're on that road trip, every place has a unique story. There's a unique sense of place that almost you can distill if you really stop and discover and discern, and almost like a winemaker, distilling a fine wine out of grapes. There is definitely a skill to that, and it's not just being a wandering man, kind of that classic road trip kind of thing. And so I can't wait to dig in, follow Sam on the stories that he's going to be able to discern and tell.
Yeah, we'll be able to watch his videos, and then when the book comes out, be able to really dig into what's going on in America, both in her past and currently in all these different places. Well, we better get this diesel damsel back to the dock, or else we'll be paddling home, Mel. So until next time, thanks. The Themed Attraction Podcast is hosted by Freddy Martin and Mel McGowan. Our guest was theme park author and urban planner Sam Gennawey. You can follow Sam's incredible nationwide road trip adventure at samvanrvadventures.com and almost anywhere on the social web, that's YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, by searching for Sam Van RV Adventures. Get access to more stories and interviews at themedattraction.com, the world's most comprehensive site on theme park and theme park attraction design. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Just look for themedattraction.com. Connect with Mel by email via mel@storylandstudios.com or follow him on Twitter @Mel McGowan and Instagram @Visioneer. You can find me at freddymartin.net and follow my adventures @SkipperFreddy on Instagram and Twitter. Our theme music was composed by Rob Watson. Other music provided by The Lost Dogs. This episode was designed and produced by the one and only Dr. Barry Hill. Find him at barryrhill.com. You know, Mel, Barry can weigh up to 700 pounds and leap over 20 feet. But we're only about 15 feet away, so he'll leap right over us. Thanks for listening, folks.